and I walk down the street in Hebron, and a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another pastor. No. I want to. This is very, very important.
It is important. It is
extremely important.
Yeah, lay it down.
Author and journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates had a lively debate on CBS Morning with co-host Tony Dokoupil over Coates' new book called The Message, which is at least partly to do with Israel's apartheid and impact on Palestinians. So I have a few clips to share here, and I'm also going to add some more context to a lot of what is discussed, including at the end, I'll add even more context to a claim that Dokoupil makes in the last clip that I will help to clear up a little bit. But here is the first clip.
Ta-Nehisi, I want to dive into the Israel-Palestine section of the book. It's the largest section of the book. And I have to say, when I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk. I have asked repeatedly in my interviews whether there is a single network, mainstream organization in America with a Palestinian American bureau chief or correspondent who actually has a voice to articulate their part of the world. I've been a reporter for 20 years. The reporters of those who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out. But what I saw in Palestine, what I saw on the West Bank, what I saw in Haifa in Israel, what I saw in the South Hebron Hills, those were the stories that I have not heard.
So Ta-Nehisi Coates went to these areas, experienced the apartheid firsthand. I'll get to more of that later on in the video. But this is a clear difference of perspective. Tony Dokoupil does not tell you here in this interview or before this interview that he has family in Israel, or at least did in October. It's possible they're out now. This is a clear conflict here. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't be in the interview, but it's probably worth mentioning that you have a certain perspective. And this speaks exactly to what Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying here, where the Palestinians in these hosting positions. In fact, I remember at least a couple of Palestinian journalists losing their jobs or being pushed aside over the past year, largely because of the perspective that they were offering. Think of someone like Mehdi Hassan, who lost his show. There was a journalist in Canada who lost her job because they were putting forward a perspective that is not familiar to a lot of these newsrooms. Now, it's also worth mentioning here, Dokoupil brings up the violence that's been perpetrated by Palestinians without bringing up the differences here. So, over the past year, Palestinians, this is UN data, right? It is so out of whack that they don't even bother to give the Israeli side here a graph because there is no growth in either fatalities or injuries over the past year. There has only been in Gaza and the West Bank. So over 41,000 fatalities, over 96,000 injuries. And that is what is reported. There are likely more that we simply are not aware of because the infrastructure to properly report the damage, the mass destruction going on is no longer as strong as it once was earlier on in this recent conflict. So the differences here are clear. 41,000, over 41,000 to over 1,200, which again has not changed since October 7th that it doesn't. Ta-Nehisi Coates, we'll get to this. It's so out of whack that you cannot possibly justify this sort of response after what happened on the 7th, and not to mention what's gone on before, the apartheid, which is what led to the entire thing. People are pretending that all of this just came out of nowhere on October 7th, are just ignoring the obvious history here. But let me get to the next clip.
But you write a book that delegitimizes the pillars of Israel. It seems like an effort to topple the whole building of it. So I come back to the question, and it's what I struggled with throughout this book. What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
Muslim included.
I would not want a state where any group of people laid down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case, of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down the street in Hebron. And a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another pastor. No. I want to. This is very, very important.
It is important. It is
extremely important.
Yeah, let me lay it down.
I'm working with the person that is guiding me is a Palestinian whose father, whose grandfather and grandmother was born in this town. And I have more freedom to walk than he does. He can't ride on certain roads. He can't get water in the same way that Israeli citizens who live less than a mile away from him can.
And why is that okay? Why is that?
This is just one of many examples of how Israel commits apartheid. Ta-Nehisi Coates, a visitor to Israel, is able to go in areas where a Palestinian Israeli cannot. This was, and to be clear, this is before October 7th. This has been going on forever. This is the apartheid that is going on. This is what leads to a lot of the tension that results in a lot of the violence. So this has been broken down. Again, this piece is from, note the date here, again, before October 7th. A lot of this is, there's a lot of attention now on what's been happening or what the Israeli government has been doing, but there should have been that attention put on it well before. So as Amnesty International here writes, Israel's apartheid against Palestinians is a cruel system of domination and crime against humanity. Mentioning here massive seizures of Palestinian land and property, unlawful killings, forcible transfer, drastic movement restrictions, and the denial of nationality and citizenship to Palestinians are all components of a system which amounts to apartheid under international law. This is also shared, actually before I get to it, they also write here at the time, they called for an arms embargo, which is what we are now seeing activists call for because of the mass destruction that Israel is causing. But this is also shared by an Israel-based human rights organization, B'Tselem, where, again, note the date, 2021. They broke down here Israel's apartheid, going on to write, the Israeli regime pursues this organizing principle in 4 major areas through land, citizenship, freedom of movement, and political participation. Look at how Tony Dokoupil, at the beginning of that clip, brings up, why are you only concerned about a Jewish state? Why are you delegitimizing the pillars of Israel? Apartheid is a pillar of Israel? A separate set of rights for people depending on their ethnicity is a pillar of Israel? Is that what you are trying to claim? It's an attempt to try and paint Ta-Nehisi Coates into a corner about, why are you so concerned about this state, this Jewish state, and not concerned about the other states, about the Muslim state? Who is claiming that? This is the same, like, this joke is made about Twitter where it's like, I like waffles. Oh, so you hate pancakes? Like, just because you are discussing one conflict, one that you had experience in the country, experiencing the apartheid firsthand, because you are discussing that, and the obvious uh, atrocities being committed by that state doesn't mean you aren't concerned about other conflicts, other atrocities. But in this instance, we are talking about an ally of the West. This is why Americans, Canadians, citizens of other countries that are allies of Israel, this is why their voice, our voices hold more weight here, because Israel is an ally committing these human rights abuses. This is, I mean, he brings up, I didn't show, but at the very beginning of this discussion, he brings up that he thinks writers, journalists should have more of a focus on the issues that are not being discussed. This is one that is not being discussed, at least wasn't, in a way that it should be. And even now, as you see with the coverage of it, it's not being discussed and framed properly. I saw a headline yesterday, I think it was from the Washington Post, or maybe it was from BBC. But regardless, one of these establishment papers, where it was about the Israeli strike in Lebanon. But the way that they titled it, it was "Blast Heard, Smoke Seen," as opposed to, "Hey, Israel launched a strike, and this is what happened." This, strike, Israeli strike hits Lebanon, causing death and injury. But no, it's smoke seen, strike heard. Like, it's just, who did it? I don't know. Someone did. Who knows? Doesn't matter. It's the way things are framed differently compared to how other sorts of news items are framed when it's a different country doing it. You see it, once you recognize it, you see it everywhere, because it is very clear that there is just a different way of focusing on this. Last thing I want to mention here before going to the last clip, just worth mentioning as well that Human Rights Watch also has discussed the apartheid. They have a breakdown here that I'll link to below, going on to say, across these areas and in most aspects of life, Israeli authorities methodically privilege Jewish Israelis and discriminate against Palestinians. Laws, policies, and statements by leading Israeli officials make plain that the objective of maintaining Jewish Israeli control over demographics, political power, and land has long guided government policy. Let me get to the last clip.
Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong. It's really, really simple. Either what I saw was right or it's wrong. I am, for instance, against the death penalty. What the person did to get the death penalty, it really doesn't matter to me. I don't care if they were selling a nickel bag of marijuana or if they were a serial killer. I am against the death penalty. I am against a state that discriminates against people on the basis of ethnicity. I'm against that. There is nothing the Palestinians could do that would make that okay for me. My book is not based on the hyper-morality of the Palestinian people.
What is just amazing about all of this is that this has to be argued. You have to argue that Palestinians are humans. That despite any history, which Tony Dokoupil, of course, doesn't give you the full picture, I'll add a little more context there, that despite any, peace deal that fell through, that does not then give Israel the right to dominate Palestinians, to have these occupied territories, to institute apartheid, to have a separate set of rights for Palestinians, to needlessly bomb civilians. What is Dokoupil's argument here? That because a peace deal didn't happen, because in his mind, Palestinians sabotaged the peace deal, it's perfectly fine to dominate these civilians. It's perfectly fine to have a separate set of rights. What is the argument? There is no argument. And why does this have to be argued at all? Why should people have to argue for the human rights of Palestinians? That shouldn't need to be a point that is made. And it shows you how far right wing, this is just CBS Morning, how far right wing, typical framing around Palestinian human rights are, when this has to be a point made on television as opposed to it being an obvious thing. Of course, Palestinians are humans that deserve rights. It's wild. Now, I'm not going to, I highlighted many portions of this article and realized it's going to take me like 10 minutes to properly break this down. I don't want to do that here. So I will link to this below the video. But the Oslo Peace Accords were signed in 93. So this is articles from 11 years ago, so 20 years prior to this article. But signed in 93, and it was sort of a very light framework around the idea of Palestinians and Israel working towards some sort of agreement around land that never said anything in stone. At the time, this writer believed the Oslo Accords would lead to peace. He goes on to admit that he was wrong, and that Edward Said, who wrote the counter article in, I think it was the London Review, that he was right. It's there somewhere. But so at the time, there was this disagreement over whether or not this would, London Review of Books, over whether or not that this would work out. And it didn't, because there was nothing really set in stone. And eventually what happened here, so Tony Dokoupil wants to try and put forward the idea that it was Palestinians that destroyed the idea of peace. When the reality is, when the Likud party and Benjamin Netanyahu came into power in, I believe it was 96, they began to completely undermine the Oslo Accords, including taking land, expanding settlements when they were supposed to be pulling back and allowing Palestinians to have their own land. So he went on to undermine it, which then led to the reaction from Palestinians and the Second Intifada, which then led to the lack of any real peace deal. So, but to completely ignore the fact that the Israeli government were the ones to first undermine the deal is just to not give you the full context of what actually went on. So, and again, it's important to note here, even without all of that, let's pretend it was Palestinians who completely sabotaged the peace deal. That does not give Israel or any state the right to dominate them. That shouldn't have to be argued on national television.